what many refer to as Kenya's economic engine. It is a ministry in charge of trade, investments. It's a ministry in charge of industry as well. All MSMEs and all Juakali people are under this industry. This ministry particularly is in charge of our economy and the driver of economic growth. Earlier on, we were privileged to have a conversation with a person in charge of this ministry, in the person of the Cabinet Secretary, Honorable Lee Kinyanjui. And this is what we discussed. Have a listen, have a look, and let's see if we can pick up a thing or two that can aid us in how we live in 2025, or rather 2026. Welcome to this conversation with the Cabinet Secretary for Investments, Trade and Industry, Honorable Lee Kinyanjui. Karibu sana.
Welcome. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya's industrial takeoff is something that has been spoken about for a long time. It is a dream, it is an aim that has been long promised, but unfortunately often delayed. Right now, where we are, observers say that the question is not anymore about whether Kenya can industrialize. It's about whether Kenya can industrialize quick enough, smartly enough, in order to protect, and boldly enough, I dare say, in order to protect its position as the economic nerve center for East Africa. We want to talk to the minister to understand where we are, why we are here, and where we're going, and what it will take to get there, especially considering the situation on the ground, the economic situation on the ground, that is, and of course the performance of comparable peers in our region. We're talking about Rwanda, we're talking Tanzania, and Ethiopia. Karibu sana Bwana Waziri.
Thank you. Thank you.
First of all, perhaps you could help us paint a big picture, if you may, and specifically about the state of the nation as far as industrialization is concerned. How would you characterize our progress as a country in the past year?
Thank you. So allow me first to thank you for this opportunity and to appreciate that the conversation around industry and commerce is extremely important because economic growth, employment of our young people are very important issues that actually affect even the national stability of the nation. So we are very keen to increase our manufacturing. We are very keen to ensure that there's value addition for agricultural produce and so on. But the most significant fact is where we are coming from so that we can appreciate where we are going. So I think most of the commodities that were exported from Kenya for the longest have been in raw form. So if you talk of tea, if you talk of our coffee, you will hardly go to a place in Europe and find Kenyan tea. So what we have done is to try and look at that entire ecosystem. There are certain key challenges we found. One was having international standards when it comes to packaging, especially for food products. Two was a tax regime. Three, companies that had an interest and expertise in that area. So what have we done? First, we removed tax on imported materials for exports of products as finished goods. So what this has done is to encourage many people to do value addition here. So instead of sending your tea in raw form, you can package it here, brand it, and sell it as your own tea in whichever market in the world. That has gained good traction, and I'm sure in the coming years we'll be able to have Kenyan tea in the capitals of America and many other places. The other issue is that government has also set up the special economic zones so that if you come today and you say that you want to establish a factory or industry of one nature or the other, government is telling you don't need to buy the land, you don't need to bring the roads or the power, we'll give you a plug-and-play situation. So again, in Dongo Kundu, in Naivasha, and other private special economic zones, including Tatu, Tilisi, Rea Vipingo, Two Rivers, there's an enhanced economic incentive for investors to go there. And the good thing is, if you go there, you'll find many companies that have already set up and others that are coming up, and they want to take advantage of those economic opportunities that are already in place. Most significantly also, we've been working with our markets, because when you produce here, it's also good to know that we are a 50 million market, so we cannot consume everything. So again, you may be aware that Kenya has signed trade agreements with the UAE, with the European Union. We're in discussions with the United States, and also at the tail end with China. And this is just a few of the many others that we are discussing. The President, William Ruto, is the chairperson of COMESA. So we also have, we are the voice of 21 countries when it comes to trade within the continent. We are also within the Africa Free Trade area, which means also goods produced here have access to much of the region within Africa. So a lot is being done. In the past, we were not doing as well, but I want to confirm that there are indications. Even if you look at vehicles, assembled vehicles, I think have gone up by 25%. That I got that information. So there are indications that things are changing. Banks or the financial sector are critical for manufacturing. Traditionally, the percentage of lending by commercial banks to industry has been very low. And worse still is that our banks like short-term lending. So if you come to a bank and you say you want to go to this country, bring this product and sell within a month or two, they're very happy to have that discussion. But if you say you want to put up a business that will take 10 years to repay, we don't have that kind of long-term lending. And it's for that reason, again, working through the government, the president instructed that we should look for long-term financing, because industry cannot thrive on short-term financing. Short-term is for trading, but long-term is required for us to trade. And working through the KDC, Kenya Development Corporation, we are trying to assemble capital so that if you come to us and say you want to put a pharmaceutical company, and you would want a loan or equity by government, we are ready to work with you. And we believe that through such initiatives, Kenya can be able to occupy the right place. And we have certain sectors we've picked. But in short, I would say that the levers for lifting the country into industrialization are currently in good place. And we are beginning to see good change.
Right. So you've told us about the things that are pushing the needle. Would you care to tell us a little bit about the things that are, unfortunately, remaining a bit stuck, the areas that still requires a bit of fixing?
Yeah, I think the first area that requires fixing is the mindset of Kenyans. You will find that on average, Kenyans don't have an industry. The idea of a whole industry, we don't see it like a local thinking. If you go to a school and you ask children, maybe in secondary school, what they would want to be, you will rarely come across anybody who says, I want to be an industrialist. So again, the first thing is we need to tell the people that the money, the wealth in any nation comes out of value addition. And there's no country so far in the world that has made it through just selling products from other countries, being a consumer nation. So industrialization and value addition is the way of the future. So once we're able to address that, everything else can fall in place. Sometimes it is unfortunate, I call for meetings for industry and you can hardly count local indigenous people. So we're really not in the manufacturing space. So we really need to change our thinking.
Why is this so? Why do you think this reality?
We want to grow the maize and just give to somebody to go and do the processing. Yet processing of, say, maize meal is a very basic thing. Wheat, very basic. So, but we don't want to engage at that level. I think it has to do also with our education, our socialization. We have no role models in industry and so on. But Japan, India, China, the US, UK, Germany, all these great nations, behind them is a very strong engine of industrialization. So if you lack industrialization, we can talk till the cows come home. So we have to start that. And again, the other issue is also with the minds, also on consumer patterns.
Before you go to consumer patterns, still in this mindset thing, the software, culture, what are some of the ways that can be employed to shift this culture? As you say, our heroes are not industrialists.
Absolutely.
They're not the Rockefellers, they're not the the Akio Toyotas of this world.
Yeah.
Our heroes are in other fields. What does it take to create that shift, that mental shift that you say is required?
Yeah. I think it's good to say that this problem is very deep-rooted. There are some places, some counties who build the CAIPs, county aggregation centers. And so we are trying to get local people to come and do value addition there. Government has already built. We have the power, we have the roads, we have the water and everything. And we are literally saying we even can fund you as government for you to come. But you find the uptake is not as high as it would have been. So I think the first thing is just education. And I also would say we have not been able to profile our industrialists. So we should be able to say that, for example, we have this guy who does pick and peel, Kimani Rogendo. He's one of our successful industrialists, people who have made it. That product is being sold in many other countries across the region. But where is his story? So we need to document the story of successful industry. Let Chris Kirubi, he started Hako Industries, still there, doing very well. So we don't tell the story of those who have succeeded. So that our young people in earlier stages of life can also pick that and know that this is the way of the future tomorrow. Because, children will also go by what they see. But if in our list of people to look forward to, there's no industrialists, then we'll think of all being movie stars and, pilots and doctors, yet we know what really the country needs. It's unfortunate that in most of the commodities, say pharmaceutical, we're importing nearly 80% of what we consume here. In the larger region, including Uganda, Tanzania, and all those countries, the importation is even higher. So these are areas where Kenyans can come together. And the other area I need to mention, how have we deployed our capital? So you find that most people, if I have my 500,000, I'll go and buy a plot, I don't know where. Another one will go and buy a plot where. So sometimes you want to know what are these plots for, what is this land for. Oh, when I get old, I can be there. If I die, I'll be buried there. So a lot of misdirected capital. If you look at other countries, what people do is your savings is in a fund or in a bank. So this bank can go and invest in a company, an industry. That company can grow and you get money. That's how all these companies have grown. That's how Twitter, that is how Elon Musk and everybody. So the people who normally have the ideas oftentimes don't have the money. So how do we make it that instead of all of us buying land and subdividing, we can put that money in a fund? And that fund can find a person who is ready to start this industry. He has a good idea. The market is ready for him. Invest a couple of millions there. In a few years, that company will move to another level. So there's what we are calling growth of private equity. That's what we call private equity. Even you have what you call venture capitalists. Venture capitalists are people who come and say, you have a good idea, you can make it, you don't have the money, I'm ready to risk my 5 million. Then grow it in another 2 years, you get to another level. So I think we have to reconfigure even how we deploy our capital. And one great thing that has happened, this project by the president on affordable housing is a game changer. And I know many people have not seen it in the context of industry. But I think one of the most critical things that were happening before, for the middle class, their own way of saving and taking care of their future was to own some apartment here, build something in Kitengela or Mariakani or that kind of thing. So whatever money they got, they went to build there. But now, wait a minute, government has come. For example, in my own hometown, the government will do a total of like 10,000 houses. So if you're planning to come and also copy-paste and do that, you'll have nobody to go there. So you're going to have what you call capital that requires now to be redirected. Redirected. So there's an opportunity for us to come with local, indigenous, private capital, where we tell our Kenyans, you'll be paid 10%. You invest in this fund. When you invest in that fund, then you have a pool of maybe 100 billion or 200 billion. This 200 billion is what now the fund managers can use to fund our industries. And this is what is happening in Japan and all these other countries, that people put their money where it can grow their country, it can provide their food, it can provide employment, and everybody gains. But the dead capital across the nation is quite alarming.
Right. Earlier on, you mentioned manufacturing, and you did mention the special economic zones. Let's talk about them for a bit and some of those industrial parks that we have. Um, some would argue that, yes, we have these facilities, but there's a conflict or a discrepancy between perhaps what you might call the target occupancy versus the true occupancy. We have these facilities. They're well supplied with the roads and all the other things. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And talk to us a little bit also about any incentives that are there to help people to be able to move into these places. And the reason I ask this is, of course, if we look at our facilities in Kenya and we compare ourselves with some of the people in the region that are doing taking a similar approach. For example, Ethiopia, the so-called Hawassa Industrial Park has had more than 20,000 jobs at peak before the disruptions. In Rwanda, the Kigali Special Economic Zone is nearly fully occupied with streamlined one-stop services. In Tanzania, the Bagamoyo space, they have revived, even the Dar es Salaam SEZ and so on. So we're seeing, observers are noting that our neighbors are getting their act together and finding ways to get people in to these places. Would you care to tell us about the current state of our own facilities?
Yeah. First, it would be very unfair to compare Kenya with any of those countries. Kenya is in a league way above those countries from a GDP point of view. Maybe the only difference, and I think this is important for every Kenyan to note, Kenya has a democracy that tends to put everything to a vote. You want to build a road? Okay, we must all agree. But it's not always that people agree, but some things are good for the nation. So like now we have the Mau Summit Road to Nakuru. So somebody will go to court, another one will go to court. So some of the countries you have cited without saying, when they say you do this, there's no opportunity for any discussion. It has to start tomorrow. If you say you want to relocate these people to build this road, or to build this market, there's no conversation. You have to do it. So Kenya is a democracy, and sometimes democracy tends also to draw back. So even when we have come up with very good, even affordable housing, it was taken to court. There's no police, even the expressway, even Thika superhighway. So we have a litigious nation, and sometimes the gap, that tends to draw things, and everything has to go through public participation. So even if we all agreed on one thing, those countries you mentioned, when it comes to implementation, Kenya, you will be taken round before something. And I think this is an honest conversation we need to have with ourselves. We cannot say on one side we want to develop, we want to move forward, and still use the old methods that have kept us going around. But more significantly is that if you look at on a number basis, because you see now when you compare, say, Kenya and Rwanda and say, you also need to look at numbers. Kenya, in the textile space, I think we are probably the third in the whole continent, export to the US and many other markets. In the fresh produce and horticulture, we are number one in Africa, fourth in the world in terms of that space. When it comes to what you call maybe agro products, I think that's where we've been having a problem, where we're importing our rice, we're importing sugar, we're importing all this. So what the government has done, one, is to privatize the sugar farms so there can be efficiency. So from a situation where we were importing nearly 40 to 50%, we want to reduce that. Maybe now I would say maybe importation could be at 20%. But I'm sure in another year, that importation can be zero. And maybe by 2027, Kenya can start exporting sugar. The same with maize. We've had not so good weather this year, but the reality is that moving forward, the first way to contain your economy is to make sure that you're not buying food. So that's, I think we've had a very big success in that area. When you come to what you may call the hardcore manufacturing, let's say motor vehicles, pharmaceuticals, and textiles, we have the automotive policy that seeks to localize the manufacturing of parts. Before you assemble the whole car, you start with the parts. And therefore, we are saying companies that will use parts that are made in Kenya will give you a tax benefit. So with that, it means if you have a company that is producing oil filters, tires, car seats, exhaust pipe, or anything that is used in the motor vehicle, then that vehicle that has used those parts will attract a lower tax than one that has come fully built from another country. That will create nearly 100 industries across the whole nation. So that's a big area that we are working on. Pharmaceutical, I already mentioned, we are importing much of everything from out. So again, we are saying if we must import, we'll import what you call the active ingredient. Because when you import medication already constituted, you'll find that maybe 95% of it is water or maybe starch. And starch is basically like cassava or potatoes and all that dried. Then you have the active ingredient. So we import the active ingredient, get local companies to do the constitution. And just to mention that the trade balance between Kenya and India, we are on a deficit of nearly 1 trillion. It is the worst. And of that, nearly 70% medicines and agrochemicals. Much of those, we can reduce that by over 60% if you are able to do it here. So these are the conversations we are having and creating deliberate policies that can allow us to spur growth in the country. Lastly is in the area of textiles. You're aware that Rivertex was privatized, and we have a big player who has come in so that he can start now preparing the garments, and now the farmers can grow the cotton when they're sure the market is there. We also have another one coming up in Lamu. So when all these are finally working together, we believe that we'll be able to put our textile industry where it belongs. But a nation that does not clothe itself, does not feed itself, does not drive on its motorbike or car and anything like that, is really walking on borrowed time. So what you're trying to do, it can't happen. Or when you're sick, you have to get medicine. So the first conversation is, how do we provide solution to what we already have? Then when you've provided that solution, how can we also provide the same solution to our neighbors and other nations that we trade with? So that's where we are, and I'm happy to say that there's very positive progress in that area.
All right. The comparisons that exist with those countries, I think mostly dwell on implementation.
Yes.
And the other thing is also the cost of production, which in our country is quite difficult. For instance, the cost of power, electricity in the country is I think the highest in the region, among the ones that, it's arguable whether we're in competition with each other or not, but our costs are quite high. And a few other issues. For example, the regulatory space is also a little bit difficult, and lots of investors have had trouble with this, local and foreign. If you were to answer as simply as possible, Mheshimiwa, why does Kenyan manufacturing remain less competitive, at least in terms of production? Why does it remain less competitive than those neighbors who may not be as advanced as we are? Yeah. And what can we do, more importantly, because Kenyans want to know, what can we do to make sure that even that advantage that exists remains an advantage? And I say this because different observers will say that some of our less privileged neighbors have caught up to us and even are on track to overtake us in a number of key things. Yeah. For example, cost of production. Yeah. What would you say?
So again, that's a gross misinformation. Is it? And I want to elaborate. Cost of power is just one of the items that constitute to the cost of power. It is not the only one. Now, the cost of power must also be looked at vis-a-vis the availability of power. So you cite some countries that have low cost of power, but I want to confirm that it's not good to mention, but many of them don't have the power. So you'll find that in a day, you have 8 hours of power rationing. So you want to put up your industry here, yes, it's given at half what Kenya is giving, but it is not available. So I am not justifying why the Kenyan number is high, but I think we must find a way of flipping the coin, that today, wherever you want to set up your industry in Kenya, there will be power. It may be slightly higher than a few of our neighbors here, but it is available. 2, the currency. Stability of the currency is the most important thing for anybody who is in manufacturing, because you'll find that you're importing raw materials from some countries out there in the world. So when those raw materials come here, they require that you have stability. But if the price goes up tomorrow it goes this way, it goes there, the dollars are not available, you're not allowed to repatriate your dividends or profits into your country, then you can't operate in that sort of environment. So I want to confirm that Kenya is a magnet for investment, both in industry, and I think it's also good to look at this in the context of numbers. Compared to all our East African countries, in spite of our power being high, from an industrial point of view, we are growing higher than all our neighbors. So there's the issue of stability, even political stability. Kenya, we may have our issues, but the point is we have a very good constitution. A constitution that can stop government, can stop an industry, can stop regulators, can stop anybody you can imagine. So that gives confidence. When it comes to land laws, property rights, support institutions like CABs or any other that is necessary for manufacturing. So I think it's my responsibility also to say that Kenya can do more, but we are already way ahead of our neighbors, but we still need to do more. So the notion that they're attracting more than we're attracting is not supported by numbers.
Is it?
Yeah.
However, there are those even here who, when starting, they're having ideas and starting, manufacturing plants and so on, will still complain about the cost of power as a major grievance for them, maybe hindrance. In addition to, the ease of doing business, things like licensing, for example, regulations, the regulatory space is, for most observers, quite difficult. For instance, there are investors that say they have to procure up to 9 different licenses to do a single thing. Even local investors who want to set up, say, something in the retail or restaurant sector and so on. There's still those problems. What would you say the government is doing to help ease that journey towards setting up successful business here?
Yeah. So I think there's a deliberate attempt by government to try and make it easy. And I think the best way to look at it is the e-citizen platform, so that from the comfort of your room, you can go, make payments, know what you require, without even having to go to the bank and so on. Putting our land registry also online through the Alisasa, I think that's a very progressive thing, so that you can be able to transact, pay your land registry. And these are matters that affect the cost of doing business. We also have the county interface, so I think what we need to do is to bring the counties on board and also ensure that they do not continue to do one license after the other and make it. But you may also know that we've taken to law what you're calling a uniform licensing bill, and it seeks, you see, we had a problem where one county is charging this, the other one is charging this. You're operating in 5 counties, you require 5 licenses, so we're trying to harmonize that. So I must say that is work in progress. But from where we sit, I think there's a bit of convergence in terms of we need to align that. But again, if you look at the costs, or maybe let me put it the other way around. For example, if you want to open a restaurant, you must go to public health. You must also do fire and a few others that are necessary. But it's also good to know going to public health also ensures that when I come to eat there, I have the confidence that the people serving me have gone through the requisite health parameters and that I'm eating food that is safe. So because we also have tourists here and they don't want tomorrow to come and they're fearing they'll get cholera. If you look at fire, if I'm sleeping in this hotel, I want to not to sleep with the worry if there was a fire, what would happen to me? So we need also to make sure that those organizations and compliance institutions that are given that responsibility don't just collect the money, but also end up doing the job for which they are meant to do, so that you can create safety, you can create comfort and increase businesses. I personally would not want to go and eat in a restaurant where people have not undergone any public health sort of vetting, because I'll be risking my own health. So we're saying we need to balance between what is needed and maybe too much. And where we can amalgamate a few, we can bring them together. But it's an area we take very seriously.
All right. Let's talk about branding, for example. You may have probably a different story about how things were when you were growing up,
Yeah.
or when you were coming up in the world. But this tag of made in Kenya, every season, every generation, there's a branding that seems to be dominant. For some, it's made in Japan. For others, it's made in China, and so on. And we're building all these other countries. Someone asks, made in Kenya, what is the path to take to make made in Kenya a premium, even desirable thing, not just locally, but regionally and globally?
Yeah, so I think we must agree that many years ago, a lot of our clothes were actually made here, our shoes and stuff. But along the way, I think in the mid-80s, we had what we call the Structural Adjustment Program. And those were programs that were brought by the World Bank and some of these players that said, open your borders, allow free movement, blah, blah, all those things. So the result was that our local industries were exposed and products from countries that were much more developed flooded the market. And therefore, we couldn't keep up with the pace, and many of them did not survive. So in a way, that period marked a retrogressive moment in the history of the nation, because there was flooding of used clothes, imported clothes, so the Rivertex and many others could not survive. But I think we have also found that the time for us to change that conversation has reached, where we must protect that which is ours. We must give opportunity for our young people to find opportunities at home, because when you don't create those opportunities here, they go to Europe and work in the same Mercedes factory that will finally be imported here. Then we have immigration issues. Then we have all these social challenges that come. So I think the challenges of the 80s are partly responsible for not just Kenya, but a lot of the countries. But also there's a colonial problem. We may want to remember that colonies were basically for producing raw materials, whether it's cocoa, tea, coffee, for factories in the colonial master's place, whether it's in Germany or Britain. So, but we can't live in the past. So we're saying moving forward, we must take charge of our destiny, value add our coffee, our tea, create industries for textile, create opportunity for the auto industry, for pharmaceuticals. We also create the same platform that people can come together. And we're also advising our Kenyans, please put your money or put your capital in a manner that employs your son tomorrow, creates a future where medicines can be available here, and so on and so forth, as opposed to putting your money where it just waits, for no end.
On the subject of textiles,
yes.
For example, when the big textile industries of Kenya collapsed, when they did, the likes of Rivertex, as you say, when made in Kenya was actually something, of pride. Mm-hmm. The reasons why those industries fell are still sort of existing today. And for a Kenyan who's on the ground trying to look for an apparel or something to wear for a wedding, for a job interview, or even this sort of interview, it's hard to argue with value. It's hard to argue with, a suit made from Kenyan cotton that costs, say, 30,000 shillings versus a suit that has come from, let's say, Turkey or China or India, and it costs 8,000 shillings and looks almost indistinguishable. How do we, in the quest to shift that conversation to, as you say, protecting the local industry and making it easier for Kenyans to be able to afford it, how do we make that value conversation make sense? Because everyone knows right now the economy is tough for a lot of Kenyans, and you've got to make decisions based on what you've got and not necessarily what you would like. And or even patriotism, which is, it's hard to be a patriot when you're hungry. How do we fix that value?
Yeah. So I think the best example to give is India. India decided to make their own vehicle, Tata, Mahindra, and many of those. I remember many years ago when you were growing up, that's when the Mahindra was introduced into Kenya. It was just another concoction. There was really nothing much to talk about.
Even the Kenya police had
It could not go beyond, I think, 30 kilometers. It was very slow. But the point is, when the police and other people bought it here in Kenya, it was a joke. We made fun of it, because if you a policeman is supposed to catch, I don't know, thieves and all that, and you can't. So, but the point is, they learned from their mistakes. They improved the Tata, they improved the Mahindra, they improved all the other models. Today, Tata is actually buying other bigger established vehicles, vehicle manufacturers like Leyland, for example, was bought by Tata and many others. So we are saying we may not start from a point of perfection, but we must strive to perfection. On the issue of Kenya, made in Kenya being slightly more expensive than the other, I think that's something we may need to deal with in the short run, but in the long run, if we buy more, because you see the price is determined by the scale. So if you're only producing very few, then the cost of production will be high. But if we increase in scale, then it comes down. We also need to ask our people, would you rather pay less, buy an item less that employs somebody abroad, or pay slightly higher and employ your son or your neighbor and address crime, create hope, and a better Kenya tomorrow? So I think it's a price we need to pay. And all nations in the world have gone through those moments. So we need to have a moment of pride, a moment of introspection, and I think that's how we can be able to change the conversation.
Mheshimiwa, there are some people who will be watching this interview and they're eagerly waiting to hear word on this. There are people who have done business with government. There are people who have, and for many people, doing business with government is big business. It's transformational. But a lot of them still have a lot of their money tied up, a lot of pending bills, and a lot of these companies are actually collapsing. There's some, the digital space you've spoken about, the entrepreneurs who've created stuff in that space and are still paid to the student. They can't keep the lights on, they can't pay their employees, and they're in debt. Shylocks are coming for them, auctioneers. What would you say about this? In fact, there's a statement here in Kenya that apparently doing business with government equals death for whatever SME is involved. What would you say?
I must say it's one of those realities we cannot quite run away from. And I have seen instances where families have fallen into distress, depression, and this is really a sad situation. So maybe what we need to agree, at the county level and also at government level, we should not procure that which we don't have funds for. So for example, if you don't have funds to buy furniture for the office, don't tell a supplier to bring that furniture. Because you tell them to bring the furniture, then it takes 6 months, 1 year to pay, then they fall into distress. They had given their title deed as a collateral, and now they are in problems. So I think there's need for what you call fiscal discipline. What you can afford is X amount, we live by that. Then secondly is also documentation. You see sometimes out of maybe 100 billion that we say is owed, you'll find that maybe 20 or 30 billion, there's inadequate documentation. But over and above this, we now have introduced what we are calling the EGP. And we want to really emphasize that this is really the solution, because the EGP will not allow you to procure when you don't have the funds. The EGP will not allow you to favor the person you want. It will give the best value and quality at the same time. And then it is open, so nobody will talk about favoritism. So there are digital solutions to try and fight that problem, but also to request our government officers and procurement persons to also be sensitive, because it is not right that we continue to have these problems of distress. But with the EGP, you'll be able to know even what that particular item you're supplying is funded. So you'll be in a safe place. But I think we need also a moment of introspection for ourselves and agree that it's not right that Kenyans should be suffering when they have done legitimate business and they are not being paid. And also for us at the budgeting level, we shouldn't budget for new projects while we've not been able to pay those who did the projects of yesterday. So I think there's a whole conversation both at the county assembly, at our parliament where budgets are passed, and also at the executive for us to be both rational and realistic and sensitive to the needs of Kenyans. And I think that can't be done by one office. I think we are all involved in this whole thing, from the counties to the national government to also suppliers and also the enforcement entities, to ensure that we don't have fake claimants, for example, or inadequate documentation, and so on.
Right.
Thank you.
I want you to talk to young people who are interested in these fields. And different reports say that this is one of the fastest growing areas in this country. Talk to them right now. Tell them, for instance, how or what they can rely or depend on your ministry in as far as those ideas that they've got, and how to take this to the next level and enter the world that you just painted.
Okay, so I think to our young people graduating, some of them who are already in the market, this is a time for us to come together and capture the moment. And opportunities don't last forever. So we have the manpower, we need the right attitude, we need the right connections, and we need the policies. And I want to confirm that in terms of policies, we did pass the AI policy. We did pass the data policy, the data privacy, and that's why you're seeing these companies coming here. So on the area of government aligning policy to the opportunities that are there, we are already there. So I think this is the right time, this is the moment, and we urge Kenyans to take advantage of it.
All right, now that is an interview we had earlier with the CS. I certainly hope it's been enlightening to you and gives you something to look forward to this new year. My name is Victor Muyakane, and on sign language has been Rhoda Nyamai. And to the team behind the scenes that made this a reality, and the team which actually produced